Hello and welcome to Retro Reviews, my channel where I review my favorite retro video games of all time, as well as some modern releases I have recently finished. And I'm finally going to do it. I've been tossing this idea around for a while, but I finally got it on paper and put it to rest here. I'm going to be ranking my top 10 consoles of all time. This was extremely difficult for me to do. A lot of this is going to be, obviously all this is my personal opinion. A lot of this is going to be nostalgia based. Most of these are retro consoles or older consoles with a couple modern ones sprinkled in there. And there are definitely going to be some biases here. I didn't grow up playing any Xbox consoles, so none of those will be on this list. The 360 and the original Xbox definitely are honorable mentions here. I just barely got an Xbox, I think last year when I found the Xbox I got for free. And then I'm very new to the Microsoft ecosystem and everything, so none of those are going to appear on this list. No shade thrown there or anything like that. It's just the consoles I grew up with mostly here. Other consoles that didn't quite make the cut include like the PSP, the 3DS, the NES, the Genesis. What else did I put on there? The PlayStation 4. That one was very close, but my number 10 will show you why that didn't quite make the list here. So with that out of the way, let's get into number 10, which is going to be the Nintendo Wii. Now I jumped back and forth between the Wii or the PlayStation 4. PlayStation 4 has some really stellar experiences. I think it's a really phenomenal console. I had a lot of time and hours on that console that I really enjoyed, but ultimately, I had to go with the Wii for a few big reasons. The Wii, first off, was like a cultural phenomenon. I remember, like, I was growing up during the Wii days. It was really exciting for me to go to Walmart before school one day. My mom took me to buy Brawl the day it came out. I was so excited. I could not believe I was getting this game for myself. And I was so jazzed to play it. I had it in my backpack all day long. I just could not believe I showed my friends. The Wii was something really, really special. Despite how it hasn't aged nearly quite as well, you can't deny the impact it had and the games that it had too. I just mentioned Smash Bros. Brawl, which is still one of the better experiences in the entire franchise, primarily for its single player experience. The Subspace Emissary is still one of the coolest things ever. You had Mario Kart Wii, which was like revolutionary for the franchise as a whole and still one of the best entries in the series by far. Most people really like revisiting this one, especially like retro content on YouTube, because it's so nostalgic. It's so much fun to play. Other games like Mario Galaxy, you had Twilight Princess, and even Skyward Sword for some people. I know I ragged on that just a little bit with my video on the Wii recently, but I enjoy the Zelda games on the Wii. I also love some of the more unique ones like Red Steel 2. I loved Okami on the Wii. There are a lot of things to love about this console, despite how it's aged, so it's definitely going to be here at number 10 on my list. Number 9 is going to be the Nintendo DS. Now, I almost put the 3DS on here, but I think I played much more on the DS. I think I had a more enjoyable experience overall. I think the 3DS was a natural evolution. It has better graphics, obviously. It has some phenomenal games, like the sequel to my favorite game of all time, In Link Between Worlds. I love that game so dearly, but the DS had something really special about it, and they really utilized that touchpad on the bottom, whereas the 3DS mostly has it as a second screen exclusively, and then you might use it with the second screen and the stylus if you're playing an old DS game. Most 3DS games didn't make use of the touchpad, but the DS really leaned into it, and I think to great effect for the most part. You had games like WarioWare Touched that was extremely fun. That's probably the best entry, honestly. I love the original GBA one. I love WarioWare Inc., but WarioWare Touched was really special because it had such unique mini games due to the touchpad. Other experiences like Trauma Center, Under the Knife were so much fun because of how you use the stylus to suture wounds and do things. It was just brilliant. Even games that you wouldn't think would work very well, especially when you're using movement, like the Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, work phenomenally well with the touchpad. I really enjoyed those experiences. Tack it together like one of the most enormous libraries of games as well. Like this is something really special because this is the second best-selling console of all time, just barely behind the PlayStation 2. There are so many good games on this console. It's amazing they were able to squeeze stuff like Super Mario 64 DS on there, a whole Animal Crossing game. It just was really unique, and I really like what they did with this, so it's going to be number 9 on my list. Number 8 is going to be the Dreamcast. This console was so ahead of its time. It did so much right, and I'm sad that it didn't succeed. And it's primarily due to the previous console's failings that the Dreamcast didn't kick off, because it had great graphics, the architecture of the console was brilliant, brilliant. They were really ahead of their time in terms of stuff like the memory card that you could like have a Chow on it from Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 and like take it with you like a little Tamagotchi type of thing to train it and like get eggs hatched and stuff. It was just genius. And it had some really phenomenal experiences on there. You had the original Soul Calibur, which is one of the best like arena fighters ever made. It's so good. It's still my favorite in the series by far as well, despite Soul Calibur 2 being excellent, Soul Calibur 3 being excellent. Soul Calibur was so much fun. I have very fond memories playing that with my brother. You have that Shenmue that is still beautiful to this day. Maybe hasn't aged the best, but when it came out, this thing was leagues ahead of its time. It was so brilliant. Jet Grind Radio or Jet Set Radio in anywhere other than the US, one of the best games of all time, one of the coolest art styles, gameplay mechanics. It just was really, really special. And of course, the Sonic Adventure games. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, I got when they came out. I got to experience these before they got ported over to stuff like the GameCube. I didn't have anyone else in my entire school that had a Dreamcast. I felt very unique that I got to experience these well before anybody else did. And Sonic Adventure 2 remains one of my favorite video games of all time, easily in my top 25. This console really is special, and I'm so sad that it didn't do better because I would love to have Sega still in the market. So it's going to be sitting here at number 8. Number 7 is going to be the Nintendo 64. Memory serves me right, this was the first console that I really had myself. It was more for me and my brother, for sure. We both played it, but I remember opening it on, I think, my 4th Christmas. I think I was 4 years old, just about to turn 5, and it was just glorious. I remember being so excited to have this console. It was Donkey Kong 64 was my first 3D video game I think I ever played. I might be wrong on that because I think my friend had a console before I did, a Nintendo 64 before I did, but for me, like, experiencing it by myself for the very first time, Donkey Kong 64 was something really magical. Other experiences like Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, my second favorite video game of all time, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, GoldenEye, really any of the Rare catalog, let's be honest here, Mario 64. This console, despite being kind of weird with a very wonky controller, the cartridges instead of switching over to CDs, this had some of the best software in any library ever. The Nintendo 64 was just that special, and I really loved it. I got jealous of my friends that had PlayStation 1 sometimes, but I could not deny how many phenomenal experiences I had on my Nintendo 64, and so it still remains here at the top of my, near the top of my consoles of all time here. Number 6 is going to be the PlayStation 3. This is my console that brought me into hardcore gaming as it was. I was always on Nintendo consoles as a kid. I didn't really ever deviate from that. Like I said, I'd maybe get jealous of my friends sometimes that had different consoles, but for the most part, I was very satisfied having the Nintendo games. I played mostly safe games as well. I wasn't playing anything mature until like, I remember like the GameCube era when I was watching my brother play like Resident Evil 4 and some of the more mature titles and thinking, wow, this is so cool. And when the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 came out, I was very envious of any of my friends that were playing games like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 or any of the just the mature games on either of those consoles with like Gears of War, people playing the Uncharted games. I didn't have any experiences like that. So I finally mustered up and got all the money I had, and I went with my buddy to buy off some guy on Craigslist, and we walked back to my house with a PlayStation 3, 5 games, and 2 controllers, and I had the best time. That's where I experienced BioShock for the very first time, all on my own. It was absolutely glorious. I put way too many hours into Modern Warfare 2. I played through all the Uncharted games. The Last of Us being like one of the last games I got on that console was just fantastic. I think it's still one of my like most expansive libraries out of all the consoles that I own. I really had a good time with this console. Maybe it's not maybe like the best aged console by far. I know the PlayStation 1 and 2 sold way more, even the PlayStation 4 for that matter, but the PlayStation 3 just holds a special place in my heart for how many phenomenal experiences out there. I talked mostly about first party, but you had other third parties like the Arkham Asylum games, I guess the Arkham games in general. They just really made games so well during this generation. And I think that's why I value the PlayStation 3. You could easily substitute the Xbox 360 in here right now. I talked about the Wii earlier. This generation was just something special, so it's going to be here on my list. Number 5 is going to be the Game Boy Advance. Now, this was my first handheld console I ever had. I used my brother's Game Gear every now and again. I played the old Sonic game on it, had a lot of fun with that. But my very first handheld console was the Game Boy Advance SP, the silver one, clamshell with the light that you could turn on. It was just glorious. I absolutely loved this game console. And it just had so many hits. I think that kind of like 16-bit era, the SNES era that they kind of emulated here on the Game Boy Advance was just something special. This is where I first played A Link to the Past, which is my favorite video game of all time. I got it for my Game Boy Advance, and I just fell in love immediately. It worked so perfectly on that small screen. It was such a nice, like, sized adventure for an on-the-go console. You know, I had my games on the Nintendo 64, the GameCube that I would play at home, but it was so nice to be able to get in the car when we go on car rides, big trips and stuff like that. And I could just play through games like Link to the Past, Metroid Fusion, which I got so good at and beat so many times. I started beating it well under 2 hours. I essentially was a speedrunner doing 100% speed runs in under 2 hours. It was so much fun. I had such a good time with that console. So many marvelous experiences. Again, I think the 16-bit era that they were emulating on the Game Boy Advance was just so perfect. They had the Castlevania games that are just still classic to this day. Platformers really thrived on this. Niche games like the Mario and Luigi saga starting off here. You had the Mario versus Donkey Kong. Just so many experiences there that I just value so much. The Game Boy Advance is going to be quite high on my list here. Number 4 is going to be the GameCube. Now, there's going to be, it's funny, I actually feel like I'm putting these in pairs. Like, I had like the Dreamcast next to the Nintendo 64, the GameCube next to the GBA, kind of coming out in these little waves here. I absolutely adore the GameCube, primarily because it has some of the best video games of all time on it, some of my very favorites. You've got Metroid Prime, you have The Wind Waker, you have Resident Evil 4, and a bunch of other games during that generation that were just really special. We never got the Grand Theft Auto games on there, which was never really my cup of tea either. I think the only one I really got into was San Andreas, when I finally got a PlayStation 2 later on in life. But I loved some of the third-party experiences like the SSX games, like NBA Street Volume. What a weird franchise there. This was a quirky time during, I think, this generation. People were being really experimental, and there are just so many fun experiences on this console here. Let alone things like remakes of Resident Evil 1. We got Resident Evil 0 as well. We got the wild and weird Killer 7. Like, we just had so many cool experiences on this console, and I just remember them very fondly. I'm so happy that a lot of those games are making their way over to modern consoles, because they absolutely deserve a spot to shine. Metroid Prime getting a remaster for the Switch is glorious. Wind Waker on the Wii U, let's get it on the Switch 2 now, please. It's just a magnificent thing, and I'm so glad that Resident Evil 4 got ported to multiple consoles, because as great as it was on the GameCube, everyone needed to experience that game. So the GameCube is very high on my list. Number 3 is going to be the Super Nintendo. Now, the Nintendo 64 was the first console I really remember, but there are so many perfect experiences on the Super Nintendo. 10 out of 10s. The Game Boy Advance is really high up, like I said previously, because it's very much like the Super Nintendo in the game's architecture. And the Super Nintendo had the perfect hits. They had Super Mario World, which is still a perfect game in my eyes, and of course, A Link to the Past, like I've talked about, my very favorite game of all time. They really perfected gaming, in my opinion, during this generation. Despite not being on the market for super long, coming right after the NES, the SNES really just did everything better. The controller was better, the games were better, the graphics were so much better, everything was clean and smooth. You still had licensed games that were fantastic during this era, like Capcom working with Disney to make excellent experiences. The SNES truly is a perfect console through and through. I love the experiences on it. I love how it feels to play. I love going back and playing it on on my Retroid or on the Nintendo Switch Online service. The Super Nintendo just has some of the best games ever made. I really feel like it's hard to outdo that generation because everything was just so smooth and perfect. Number 2 is going to be the PlayStation Vita. I seriously consider this as my number 1 console. If it weren't for the fact that it died prematurely, this would almost certainly be the best console in my eyes. This was the Nintendo Switch well before the Nintendo Switch came out. This was PlayStation putting out an HD handheld console with graphics comparable to the PlayStation 3 for a pretty affordable price too. I think it was $250 or maybe $300 at launch. This was a very doable console for a lot of people. If it weren't for the pretty terrible marketing and of course the proprietary memory system that was way too expensive. You could get like a 4 GB thing for way too much. I can't remember how I even got like I think I got one secondhand, a really good sized one, so I didn't have to ever worry about memory cards. But when they first came out, price gouging was awful, and I think that's the reason it really failed, because they had some phenomenal software on this. The Killzone Mercenary game was wildly fun. I could not believe I was playing a game like handheld in a first-person shooter game that just felt so good. Tearaway is still one of the best experiences ever made, that they use the back touchpad so brilliantly. A really underrated mechanic as well. Little Big Planet also implemented that very well, and Little Big Planet Vita is easily my favorite Little Big Planet game ever. You had stuff like Uncharted Golden Abyss rivaling the PlayStation 3 versions of the franchise. You had other things like Persona 4 getting its first, Golden getting its first port since the PlayStation 2. That game is phenomenal, and the fact that you could play it on the go on the Vita was just unmatched. They finally have it on the Switch now and modern consoles, but for the longest time you could only play it on the Vita, and let alone all the indie experiences. I experienced so many indie games for the first time on this console, including Shovel Knight, one of my favorite indie games ever made. So this console was the perfect indie machine. It was perfect for people homebrewing if they wanted to do stuff like that. Had so many remarkable first-party and even third-party experiences. It's just a shame it died too early. If Sony had done a better job with this would have been a smash success. I could easily see it eclipsing the PSP in terms of sales. I'm just really sad that it had to go the way it did, because I still play it. I busted out the other day to play Thomas Was Alone. So if it weren't for that, it would easily be number one on my list. But the number one spot is going to go to the Nintendo Switch for two very specific reasons. This is now the best indie machine by far, eclipsing the Vita, and gaming on the go is just the way to do it. They have one of the best catalogs of games ever. Not surprised, since it's looking to be on track to become the best-selling console of all time, or even second place maybe, but still, what a feat to do. The fact that you can play Breath of the Wild on the go, Mario Odyssey, Tears of the Kingdom, and a plethora of other games, even third-party games that you wouldn't think would work nearly as well, like The Witcher 3, that somehow still do and play really remarkably well on that. There are just so many things to love about this console. It's cheap, it's got great graphics for how portable it is, and despite being behind in the tech, it really does a great job across the board, and the first-party experiences are unmatched still. Nintendo really outdid themselves this generation, and the Switch is just a perfect console. I've played more time on the Switch than any other console. I don't think it's very close. I have well over 1,000 hours in The Binding of Isaac, and I have several thousand hours in Smash Ultimate. This just has to be my favorite console at this point, because I've played it so much, and I still play it to this day, even with my PlayStation 5 and my Xbox getting a lot of use. So that's going to be my top 10 favorite gaming consoles of all time. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorites are, any ones that I missed. If you have some really unique ones that are on your list, I'd love to hear about that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.